He was a man no one dared to approach, a giant who lived alone in the mountains, feared for his silence, feared for his strength. But one day, a little girl stumbled out of the forest, starving, broken, her family gone. And the first words she whispered to him shattered his soul. "You're bigger than my house." In that moment, the man everyone believed had no heart fell to his knees in tears. What did she mean? Why had she come to him? And who was the shadow that followed? Her through the woods? This is the story of a child's spine-chilling words, a mountain man's broken heart, and a night when tears and courage collided against a darkness that refused to die. The forest was quiet that morning, too quiet. The air clung heavy, with the smell of pine and damp soil, and not even the birds dared to sing. He was used to silence. Silence had been his companion for years, but today it carried a different weight. A man like him, built broad like the mountains that shielded the valley, had seen storms, wolves, avalanches, and winters so cruel they could tear a soul apart. He thought nothing could touch him anymore. But that morning, he was wrong. The mountain. Man's name was Elias. His life was carved out of solitude. He lived in a cabin made of rough-hewn logs, far above where most dared to climb. To the townsfolk below, he was a myth, a figure of stories whispered by firesides. Children dared each, other to point at the mountain and say his name aloud, Elias, the man who lived closer to the clouds than to people. They said he could wrestle a bear, that his heart was stone, that no woman, no child, no soul had ever seen him cry. But stories often hide what men themselves cannot bear to show. Elias carried ghosts. His cabin walls had no photographs, but his heart did. Memories of a family he had once tried to protect but lost to sickness and hunger. After that, the mountains became his refuge, his punishment, and his shield. He told himself he needed no one, and no one needed him. But fate has a way of striking when a man is most certain he has nothing left to lose. That morning, while chopping wood at the edge of his clearing, Elias heard something faint, a sound not of the forest, not of the wind. It was thin, trembling, like the cry of something small and broken. He froze, axe midair, ears sharp as a wolf. Again it came, a child's voice, faint but real. Without thought, Elias dropped the axe and followed the sound. At the bend of the trail, where the pines grew thick, he saw her, a little girl, no more than 8 or 9, standing barefoot on the frost-bitten ground. Her dress was torn, her hair matted, her cheeks hollowed by hunger. She looked like she had walked through miles of wilderness with nothing but willpower, holding her upright. When her eyes met his, Elias felt something shift inside him, an ache he had buried years ago. The girl did not scream. She did not run. Instead, she looked up at him, eyes wide and too wise for her age. Then, with a voice that trembled but carried strange courage, she said words he would never forget. "You're bigger than my house." Elias blinked, unsure if he had heard her right. But she didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She said it with such haunting seriousness that the words cut deeper than any insult or plea. He towered above her, yes, his shoulders wide, his frame massive from years of survival, but it wasn't size she was pointing to. Her voice carried a truth darker than he wanted to face. "Where's your house?" he asked, his voice low, rough from disuse. The girl shook her head, her lips trembling as if she were holding back something unspeakable. "It's gone," she whispered. "Burned. Mama. Papa." Her voice broke, and she pressed her small hand against her chest. "They told me to run. I ran." Elias felt his throat tighten. He had seen cabins burn before, had smelled the ruin of families erased by bandits, by fire, by hunger. But never had he seen the aftermath standing before him in the form of a trembling child. He wanted to ask her name, but something about her expression held him silent. Then she said something that chilled his blood. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper, but it was heavy enough to pierce the still air. "They said, he's coming for me next." Elias stiffened. He had lived in the mountains long enough to know when danger was near. A girl alone, barefoot, starving, speaking of fire and a faceless pursuer. It was more than coincidence. The forest wasn't just silent, it was watching. The mountain man should have turned away. He had built his life on walls of distance, of refusing to carry anyone's weight but his own. But as he looked at the child, the one who had measured him against her lost home, he felt his chest ache in a way he had forgotten was possible. "You'll come with me," he said finally, his voice a command wrapped in gentleness. She hesitated, eyes searching his face. Then, without another word, she stepped forward and took his calloused hand in her small one. That single touch nearly unraveled him. For years his hands had known only tools, ropes, rifles, axes, but never the fragile trust of a child's fingers, curling into his palm. Back at the cabin, Elias built the fire high and set food before her. She ate as if she hadn't seen bread in weeks. Between bites, she glanced at him, studying him with a gaze that seemed to see past the layers of muscle and beard, past the silence he wore like armor. Finally, when her hunger softened, she spoke again. "You're bigger than my house," she repeated softly, as if the first time hadn't been enough. But then her eyes filled with tears, and she added, "But you're not scarier." Those words, so innocent, so broken, slammed into Elias's chest like a hammer. He turned his face from her, pretending to stoke the fire, but it was no use. His throat closed and his vision blurred. For the first time in years, the mountain man, feared by all, bent his head and wept silently where the fire couldn't hide his trembling shoulders. Outside, the forest stayed eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. For Elias knew one thing. Whatever had taken the girls home, whatever she had run from, it wasn't finished yet. And by bringing her into his cabin, he had pulled that darkness into his own life. But as he looked at her, this fragile soul who had measured his strength against the only home she'd ever known, he realized something terrifying. He would die before he let her be taken again. The fire crackled low, its embers painting the cabin walls with restless shadows. Elias sat hunched on his stool, his massive frame shaking despite the heat. He hadn't wept in years, but the girls. Words had torn open wounds he thought were long buried. He wiped his face roughly with the back of his hand, but she had already seen. Her wide eyes didn't hold fear. They held something heavier, pity. The girl, wrapped in his old wool blanket, studied him in silence. Her hunger was gone, but her trembling wasn't. Outside, the forest remained still, too still. Elias had lived long enough to know when silence meant danger. Something waited out there. Finally, he turned to her. His voice was rough but steady. "What's your name, child?" She looked into the flames before answering. "Annalise." Her voice was small, yet it carried weight. Elias let the name sink into the air, the first human word to fill his cabin in years. "Annalise," he repeated as if tasting it. "Who's coming for you?" Her lips pressed together, her tiny fingers gripping the blanket tighter. Then, with a shudder, she whispered, "The man with the black hat." Elias felt his stomach drop. He had heard whispers in the towns below, rumors of a drifter who burned homes, who took what he wanted, who left nothing but ashes and silence. Some said he wasn't even a man, but something darker that walked like one. Elias never gave credence to fireside tales, but looking at Annalise, he realized this was no rumor. "He wanted me," she continued, her voice trembling. Papa said I had to run, that I couldn't let him find me. He said the man wouldn't stop until I was gone too." Elias clenched his fists. He had sworn never to carry another soul's burden. Yet here sat a child marked by evil, her family turned to ash. And she had run into his world. Fate had left him no choice. "You're safe here," Elias said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. Annalise's eyes searched his face. "Safe? Even from him?" The word sent a chill down Elias's spine. The black-hatted figure she spoke of wasn't just a man. He was a shadow that followed her even into her thoughts. Elias forced his voice steady. "Even from him." Night fell thick over the mountain, draping the cabin in darkness. Elias barred the door, checked his rifle, and stoked the fire until the flames leapt high. Annalise finally drifted into uneasy sleep on the cot, clutching the blanket to her chin. Elias sat guard, his eyes fixed on the door, every muscle tense. Then it came. A sound, low, dragging, unnatural, moved through the trees. Not a wolf, not a bear. Footsteps, slow, purposeful. Elias's grip on the rifle tightened. He rose, silent, as the shadow he had become, and peered through the crack in the shutter. Moonlight touched the clearing, and there he was. A tall figure in a black hat stood at the tree line, unmoving, watching the cabin. His face hidden, his shoulders broad, his presence heavy enough to make even the night air shudder. He didn't advance. He didn't speak. He just stood there, as if he knew Elias was watching him. For the first time in years, Elias felt fear crawl across his skin. He closed the shutter slowly, heart pounding, and looked back at Annalise. She stirred in her sleep, whispering words that broke him. "Papa, and don't let him take me." Elias sank against the wall, rifle across his knees. He had spent years burying his heart, but tonight it beat louder than ever. That child wasn't his blood, but she had become his reason. He could not, would not, let her face the same fire that had consumed her home. The hours dragged. When dawn finally touched the mountaintops, Elias opened the door cautiously. The clearing was empty. The figure was gone. But on the ground, pressed deep into the frost, were footprints leading toward the cabin, and then vanishing as if swallowed by the earth. Annalise woke to find Elias staring at them. "He was here, wasn't he?" she whispered, her face pale. Elias nodded once. He wanted to lie, to comfort her, but lies could not protect them now. "He won't have you," he said instead, his voice like stone. For the next days, Elias prepared. He hunted for food, chopped enough wood to last weeks, and kept his rifle loaded. But no matter how he fortified the cabin, Annalise's words haunted him. "You're bigger than my house, but you're not scarier." She had seen strength in him, not fear, and for her sake, he had to live up to it. One evening, as the firelight danced across her weary face, Annalise finally spoke the truth that had been strangling her. "Before Papa pushed me out the door, the man with the black hat said something. He said I'd replace the fire, that when he had me, the flames would never stop." Elias froze. The weight of her words chilled him more than any mountain storm. This wasn't just a man. Whoever he was, he carried a darkness that fed on fear, on destruction. And Annalise, small, fragile Annalise, was his target. The cabin door rattled suddenly, shaking under a forceful hand. Annalise gasped, clutching Elias's arm. Elias lifted his rifle, muscles tensed as a voice seeped through the wood. Low, cold, terrifying. "Give her to me, mountain man. She is mine." Elias's breath caught. The voice wasn't just sound, it was ice, sliding under his skin, squeezing his chest. He glanced at Annalise. Her face had gone white, her lips trembling. With a roar that shook the cabin, Elias shouted back, "Over my dead body!" The rattling stopped. Silence pressed in. Then, slowly, the footsteps retreated into the trees, fading into the distance. Elias lowered the rifle, his chest heaving. He looked at Annalise, who was staring at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. "You cried," she whispered as if still. Amazed, Elias knelt before her, his massive frame folding low, his voice breaking. "I cried because you reminded me what it means to feel. Because you showed me that even a man made of stone can still bleed inside." Her small hand touched his beard, trembling. "But you're not just bigger than my house. You're stronger than him, too." The words shattered him. He bowed his head, tears slipping silently into her small fingers. And in that moment, the mountain man, feared by all, realized he was no longer alone. The battle wasn't over. The man with the black hat would return. Elias knew that. But now, the tears he shed weren't just of grief. They were of promise. Promise to fight, to stand, to guard this child with every breath he had left. And for the first time in years, Elias wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. That night, the mountain was restless. Wind tore through the pines like voices whispering of what was coming. Elias sat by the fire, rifle across his knees, while Annalise slept curled against the cot. He watched her small chest rise and fall, fragile yet steady, and knew every choice he had made had led to this moment. The silence broke with a knock. Not soft, not hesitant. A single thunderous strike on the cabin door. Elias froze. His hand gripped the rifle tighter. Annalise stirred, whispering in her sleep, "Papa." Another strike. The wood groaned. Then came the voice. "Mountain, man, give her to me." It wasn't a shout. It was low, calm, deadly certain. The kind of voice that carried no doubt, no mercy. Elias rose, shoulders broad, shadow swallowing the cabin wall. He looked at Annalise once more. She had lost everything, yet here she was, trusting him with what remained of her life. He walked to the door, pressing his palm against the trembling wood. "She's not yours," he growled. "Not while I breathe." The voice chuckled. "You think your size protects her? You're bigger than her house, yes, but you cannot stop the fire." Elias's chest burned. Those were her words, the words that had first shattered him, now twisted, thrown back at him like a curse. His eyes stung, his throat ached, but his voice thundered back. "Then the fire dies with me." The door shuddered under a final blow, but it held. Then silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. When Elias opened it at dawn, there was nothing. No footprints, no shadow, no trace of the man in the black hat. Only the forest watching, as if holding its secrets. Elias turned back inside. Annalise was awake, sitting up, eyes wide with fear and hope. "Is he gone?" she whispered. "For now," Elias answered, kneeling beside her. His voice cracked, raw with truth. "But he'll return. And when he does, he'll find me waiting." Tears welled in her eyes. She reached for his hand. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." Elias swallowed hard. His voice was barely a whisper. "Because once I had a daughter. I couldn't save her. But I can save you." The words broke him. He bowed his head, his tears falling into her small hands. The mountain man, who had hidden his heart behind walls of stone, wept openly. Not in shame, but in release. Annalise leaned against him, her voice steady despite the tremble in it. "You're bigger than my house, but you're not scarier. You're braver." Elias pulled her close, his massive arms wrapping around the fragile weight of her body. And in that embrace, he felt something he thought was lost forever. A reason to live, a reason to fight, a reason to keep breathing. The forest would whisper. The shadow would return. The man with the black hat would not stop, but neither would Elias. For the first time in years, the mountain man's tears were not of grief. They were of promise. And though the world had stripped him bare, though his heart carried scars deeper than the valleys below, he knew this one truth. He would stand, he would fight, and he would not let her fall. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and join our growing family. Your likes and comments keep these stories alive and help them reach more people who need to hear them. And if you believe in the power of stories that ignite the soul, make sure to follow and share with others. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Your support means more than words can ever say.